In this video, we're going to go over the history of the Atari Jaguar and how it was a vital part of the gaming console wars.
Don't you remember staying up all night? Getting 148,000? This is the best.
We're Atari. We have the vision, and we invented the technology.
A phenomenon that spread like wildfire around the planet.
Don't watch television tonight. Play it.
In the early 1990s, as 16-bit systems like the Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo battled for dominance, a sleeping giant was preparing to re-enter the fray. Atari, once the undisputed king of video games, had seen its crown slip away after the infamous crash of 1983. But now, armed with ambitious plans and bold claims of 64-bit power, Atari was ready to leap back into the spotlight with a console that promised to revolutionize gaming, the Jaguar. The story of the Jaguar begins in the late 1980s, when Atari was still licking its wounds from the industry crash. The company had found some success with its line of home computers like the Atari ST, but it longed to reclaim its place atop the video game mountain. In 1989, Atari began work on two new console projects, the 32-bit Panther and the more advanced 64-bit Jaguar. Development of the Jaguar was handled by Flare Technology, a UK-based company formed by Martin Brennan and John Matheson. Flare had previously worked on the unreleased Konix Multisystem, an ambitious console that was ahead of its time. Atari was impressed by Flare's work and convinced them to close up shop and form a new company called Flare 2, with Atari providing funding. The goal was to create a next-generation system that would leapfrog the 16-bit consoles and establish a new standard in gaming power. As development progressed, it became clear that the Jaguar was advancing more quickly than expected. In 1991, Atari made the decision to cancel the Panther project and focus all of its efforts on bringing the Jaguar to market. At that summer's Consumer Electronics Show, Atari shocked the industry by announcing not a 32-bit system as expected, but a 64-bit multimedia entertainment system that would arrive in 1993. The gauntlet had been thrown down. The Jaguar's hardware was indeed impressive for its time. At its core were two custom 32-bit RISC processors nicknamed Tom and Jerry. Tom handled graphics and contained 750,000 transistors, while Jerry focused on sound and digital signal processing with 600,000 transistors. These were paired with a Motorola 68000 chip for general system management. Atari claimed the combination allowed for 64-bit processing, though this would later become a point of contention. Other specs included 2 megabytes of RAM on a 64-bit bus, support for resolutions up to 720 by 576, 24-bit true color graphics capable of displaying over 16 million colors simultaneously, and the ability to render up to 850 million pixels per second. The system could also generate CD-quality 16-bit stereo sound. On paper, it seemed to outclass anything else on the market or on the horizon. Atari pushed hard on the 64-bit angle in its marketing, using slogans like "Do the math" to emphasize the Jaguar's supposed power advantage over 16-bit and even upcoming 32-bit systems.
Jaguar by Atari. The only video game system with 64 bits of mega power.
The company promised a new era of incredibly detailed, movie-like graphics and gameplay far beyond what was possible on existing consoles. After much anticipation, the Jaguar launched in New York and San Francisco in November 1993. With a price tag of $249.99. It came bundled with the pack-in game Cybermorph and one controller. Atari's early sales came in hot, with the company quickly selling out its entire initial run of 17,000 units, a strong start that hinted at the demand to come. The Jaguar's design was sleek and futuristic for the time, with a low profile and angular lines that evoked a sports car. Its controller was bulky but distinctive, featuring 3 action buttons, pause and option buttons, and a 12-button keypad that could be customized for different games via overlays. While some found the controller comfortable, others criticized its unwieldy size and confusing button layout. Unfortunately, the Jaguar's impressive specs didn't immediately translate to equally impressive games. The launch lineup was thin, with only Cybermorph, Trevor McFur in the Crescent Galaxy, and Raiden available initially. While Cybermorph showed off some of the system's 3D capabilities, many felt it paled in comparison to games like Star Fox on the SNES. Trevor McFur was widely panned as little more than a glorified tech demo. As 1994 progressed, the Jaguar's library slowly grew, but many releases failed to take full advantage of the hardware. Developers struggled with the complex architecture and lack of robust development tools. Some simply ported 16-bit games with only minor enhancements. Critical reception was often lukewarm, and the 64-bit claims began to ring hollow for many gamers. There were bright spots, however. Jeff Minter's Tempest 2000 was hailed as a masterpiece, brilliantly updating the classic arcade game with psychedelic visuals and a pounding techno soundtrack. Alien vs. Predator, developed by a young studio called Rebellion, showed off impressive first-person shooting action that rivaled PC games of the time. ID Software brought Doom to the Jaguar in a conversion praised for its accuracy to the original, but these successes were too few and far between. By the end of 1994, Atari reported it had sold approximately 100,000 Jaguars, far below their expectations. The system was struggling to gain traction in a market still dominated by Sega and Nintendo, with Sony's PlayStation looming on the horizon. Atari needed a major boost to turn things around. In a surprising move, Atari and Sega announced a deal in late 1994 that seemed to offer a lifeline. Sega agreed to acquire $40 million in Atari stock and pay an additional $50 million for a license to use certain Atari patents. Most intriguingly, the companies agreed to cross-license up to 5 games per year through 2001. This raised the tantalizing possibility of Sega titles coming to the Jaguar. The deal stemmed from Atari's aggressive defense of patents it held dating back to the early days of gaming. Atari had sued Sega in 1993 for alleged infringement of a patent covering horizontal scrolling on a video display. While Atari didn't win an injunction against Sega, the legal threat was enough to bring Sega to the negotiating table. For Jaguar owners, this seemed like a potential game changer. Sega offered Atari access to a huge library of popular titles, including series like Alex Kidd, Altered Beast, Streets of Rage, Phantasy Star, Golden Axe, Shinobi, and Wonder Boy. While these would only be ports of existing 8-bit and 16-bit versions rather than new 64-bit entries, it still promised to significantly bolster the Jaguar's anemic library. Atari ultimately selected 5 titles to bring to Jaguar: Outrunners, Phantasy Star 2, Alien Storm, Shinobi, and Zaxxon 3D. Excitement built among the Jaguar faithful, who dreamed of playing enhanced versions of these Sega classics on their 64-bit powerhouse. It seemed Atari had scored a major coup against its competitors. As 1995 dawned, Atari redoubled its efforts to make the Jaguar a success. The price was dropped to $149.99 to make it more competitive with the aging 16-bit systems. A CD-ROM add-on was released, opening up new possibilities for full-motion video and CD-quality audio. Atari even partnered with Virtuality to develop a virtual reality headset for the system, hoping to capitalize on the VR craze. But storm clouds were gathering. The PlayStation and Sega Saturn were set to launch in North America that fall, bringing true next-generation graphics that would make the Jaguar's 64-bit claim seem quaint by comparison. Nintendo's Ultra 64 inches, later renamed Nintendo 64, was also generating buzz, though it wouldn't arrive until 1996. As 1995 progressed, Atari's situation grew increasingly dire. The promise of Sega games on the Jaguar failed to materialize, with none of the planned ports ever seeing release. The CD add-on, while technologically impressive, suffered from a lack of compelling software. Only 11 games would ever be released for the Jaguar CD, and its high price of $149.99 made it a tough sell for an already struggling system. Atari's marketing efforts became increasingly desperate. The company ran infomercials featuring enthusiastic pitchmen touting the Jaguar's power and value.
You want games? Jaguar's got fast 3D 64-bit games. You want slow, flat games? No. Slow is for turtles, flat is for boards, fast and 3D is for games. Jaguar games. So scary you'll cry like a whimpering fool. But you won't feel like a fool because the games won't be flat and slow, flat, slow, flat, slow. Heard enough and get fast and 3D. Games that are now playing, games that are coming soon. Games that get a 10 because they've got a good beat and you can dance to them. You want fast 3D games? Here's an idea. Atari Jaguar, 64 bits, $159.
These aired throughout 1995, but did little to move unsold inventory. In interviews, Atari executives continued to insist the Jaguar was competitive with, or even superior to, the upcoming 32-bit systems from Sony and Sega. Sam Tramiel, who had taken over as Atari's CEO from his father Jack, boldly claimed in a 1995 interview with Next Generation magazine that the Jaguar was as powerful, if not more powerful than the Saturn, and slightly weaker than the PlayStation. He even threatened legal action against Sony if they priced the PlayStation below $300, accusing them of price dumping. These statements rang hollow to many in the industry and among consumers. When the PlayStation launched in September 1995 at $299, it quickly became clear that the Jaguar was outmatched both in terms of hardware capability and software support. The Saturn, while less successful, also outshone Atari's offering. By the end of 1995, Atari's financial situation was grim. In their annual report, the company revealed that Jaguar sales had been substantially below expectations. Revenues had plummeted from $38.7 million in 1994 to just $14.6 million in 1995. Most damningly, Atari admitted that while they had sold only 125,000 Jaguars since the system's launch, they still had 100,000 unsold units sitting in inventory. Atari attributes the poor performance of Jaguar to a number of factors, including extensive delays in development of software for the Jaguar, which resulted in reduced orders due to consumer concern as to when titles for the platform would be released and how many titles would ultimately be available, and 2, the introduction of competing products by Sega and Sony in May 1995 and September 1995. Indeed, the Jaguar software library remained its Achilles heel, while a handful of standout titles like Alien vs. Predator, Tempest 2000, and Iron Soldier had impressed critics and players. The vast majority of releases were mediocre at best. Many suffered from poor frame rates, lackluster graphics, and uninspired gameplay that failed to take advantage of the system's purported power. The complex architecture of the Jaguar, with its multiple processors and proprietary chips, proved a significant hurdle for many developers. Without robust development tools or support from Atari, many studios struggled to harness the full potential of the hardware. Some simply gave up, choosing to focus their efforts on the more developer-friendly PlayStation or Saturn instead. As 1996 began, it was clear that Atari was on its last legs. Layoffs had already begun, and insider reports suggested that both Jaguar development and manufacturing had ceased. The company was simply trying to sell off existing stock before exiting the video game industry entirely. In a last-ditch effort to drum up interest, Atari slashed the price of the Jaguar to just $99. Even at this bargain basement price, there were few takers. The final Jaguar game published by Atari, the notoriously awful fighting game Fight for Life, limped onto store shelves with little fanfare. By April 1996, Atari Corporation had agreed to a reverse merger with JTS Inc., a hard drive manufacturer. This move effectively marked the end of Atari as an independent entity and spelled doom for the Jaguar. On July 30th, 1996, the merger was completed, and Atari as the world had known it ceased to exist. In the aftermath, remaining Jaguar inventory was liquidated at fire sale prices. Some units ended up selling for as little as $30. The once proud Atari brand, which had been synonymous with video gaming for nearly 2 decades, had been reduced to a footnote in industry history. Over its brief lifespan, only about 250,000 units were sold worldwide. Its library topped out at just 67 officially licensed games, with a handful more released in later years by third parties. By comparison, the PlayStation would go on to sell over 100 million units globally and amass a library of thousands of titles. Looking back, it's pretty clear why the Jaguar ended up as more of a house cat. Atari's ambitious 64-bit power claims sounded impressive on paper, but felt like a joke once you saw the games, which, let's be real, barely looked better than the 16-bit stuff people were already playing. Between its confusing hardware and the lack of developer love, the Jaguar's game library was like a ghost town of mediocre titles. But perhaps the biggest issue was Atari's own mismanagement and lack of resources. The company simply didn't have the financial muscle or industry clout to compete with giants like Sony, Sega, and Nintendo. Years of struggling in the PC market had left Atari ill-prepared for the cutthroat world of 1990s console gaming. The Jaguar's controller, while innovative in some respects, also proved divisive. Its bulky design and confusing array of buttons, including the much-maligned numeric keypad, made it unwieldy for many players. Games that effectively utilized the keypad like Alien vs. Predator showed its potential, but many developers simply ignored it. Interestingly, the Jaguar did find a second life of sorts in the years following its demise. In 1999, Hasbro Interactive, which had acquired the Atari brand, released the rights to the Jaguar into the public domain. This allowed hobbyist developers to create new games for the system without needing official licenses. This move sparked a small but dedicated homebrew scene for the Jaguar. New games continue to be developed and released for the system even today, more than 2 decades after its commercial failure. While these titles are produced in very limited quantities, they showcase what might have been possible if the Jaguar had received stronger software support during its lifetime. The Jaguar's place in gaming history is a bit of a double-edged sword. On one side, it's one of the biggest flops ever. Basically, the textbook case of what happens when a company overhypes tech, but totally forgets that people actually want good games. Yet it was ahead of the curve in some ways, leaning hard into 3D graphics and complex PC-like games, exactly where the industry would head in the years that followed. Games like Alien vs. Predator hinted at the future of immersive, first-person gameplay, laying the groundwork for the rise of iconic titles like GoldenEye 007 and Halo. So while it crashed and burned, the Jaguar still left its mark on the future of gaming. Rebellion, the studio behind Alien vs. Predator, has become a major force in the UK games industry. Tempest 2000 creator Jeff Minter continues to be revered for his unique psychedelic take on arcade-style gaming. As the new millennium dawned, the Atari Jaguar found an unexpected second life thanks to a passionate community of fans and developers. In 2000, the release of Battlesphere by 4Play marked a significant milestone for the system. This ambitious space combat game, which had been in development for 7 years, pushed the Jaguar's 3D capabilities to their limits. It featured complex polygon models and supported up to 32 simultaneous players when using the JagLink accessory, showcasing potential that was rarely tapped during the console's commercial lifespan. The same year saw the emergence of Songbird Productions, a company dedicated to keeping the Jaguar alive. Songbird began acquiring the rights to unreleased Jaguar games and bringing them to market. One of their first releases was Hyperforce, a futuristic racing game that had been left unfinished when the Jaguar was discontinued. This was followed by Protector Special Edition in 2002, an enhanced version of a game originally developed for the Atari 8-bit computer line. In 2003, Songbird released 05, a 3D space shooter that had been in development during the Jaguar's twilight years. The game impressed many with its smooth 3D graphics and fast-paced gameplay, demonstrating that quality titles were still possible on the aging hardware. Songbird's efforts didn't stop at publishing unreleased games. They also began developing new titles specifically for the Jaguar, helping to expand its library years after its official discontinuation. The homebrew scene continued to thrive throughout the early 2000s. Developers, freed from the constraints of commercial pressures, experimented with the Jaguar's hardware in ways that were never seen during its retail life. Games like Gorf Classic, released in 2005, brought beloved arcade titles to the Jaguar with enhanced graphics and sound. In 2006, a major breakthrough occurred for Jaguar enthusiasts. The Skunk Board, a flashcard developed by Stephen Coy, was released. This device allowed Jaguar owners to load ROMs onto a cartridge, making it easier than ever to play homebrew games and prototypes. The Skunk Board became an essential tool for the Jaguar development community, spurring on further homebrew creation. The year 2008 saw the release of Reboot, a powerful development framework for the Jaguar created by Matthias Doman. Reboot simplified many aspects of Jaguar programming, making it easier for new developers to create games for the system. This led to a surge in homebrew development, with titles like Jagmania and Elensar, showcasing what could be achieved with modern development techniques on the Jaguar hardware. In 2009, the Jaguar community was surprised by the release of Atari Karts, a previously unreleased racing game that had been in development before the Jaguar's discontinuation. The game was made available through Songbird Productions, adding another title to the Jaguar's official library more than a decade after the console's demise. The 2010s brought renewed interest in the Jaguar from retro gaming enthusiasts. In 2012, a new Jaguar emulator called Virtual Jaguar was released, making it easier for curious gamers to experience the system's library without owning the original hardware. This emulator has been continuously updated and improved, becoming an important tool for both playing and developing Jaguar games. In 2018, the Jaguar community was energized by the announcement of the Jaguar Game Drive, a new flashcart developed by RetroHQ. Unlike previous solutions, the Game Drive was designed to be user-friendly and support a wide range of Jaguar software, including CD games. This device made it easier than ever for Jaguar owners to access the console's entire library, including rare and homebrew titles. In 2022, the Jaguar received an unexpected boost with the inclusion of several of its games in the Atari 50, the Anniversary Celebration Collection. This compilation, released for modern platforms, introduced a new generation of gamers to Jaguar titles like Tempest 2000 and Missile Command 3D, sparking renewed interest in the console's history and library. As of 2023, the Jaguar continues to maintain a small but dedicated following. New homebrew games are still being developed, and the console remains a popular subject of discussion among retro gaming enthusiasts. The Jaguar's unique architecture and troubled history continue to fascinate developers and gamers alike, ensuring that Atari's final console lives on long after its commercial failure. Thanks for joining me on this trip through the history of this legendary console. If there is any interesting gaming phenomena you'd like me to cover, let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button so you don't miss more videos like this one. See you next time.